The night sky over New Chicago was quiet and dark when the first shadow appeared above the clouds, a shape so large that it swallowed whole constellations. At first no one noticed it. People were busy with late trains and crowded streets. Children laughed near glowing street stalls, and the hum of the city drowned out the strange low vibration in the air. Then a deep metallic hum rolled over the rooftops like thunder that did not fade. It grew, it thickened, and people began to pause and look up. The shadow split into several more, lines of faint blue lights flickering along their edges, massive shapes emerging from the dark like sleeping giants waking after years of silence. The world had not seen these ships in 10 long years. They were Earth's fleet, the pride of humanity, sent to protect distant colonies at the edge of known space. No one had expected them to return so soon, and certainly not without warning, and yet here they were, filling the skies with metal and menace. The largest ship, the flagship Orion, drifted into low orbit, its armored hull scarred and scorched as if it had flown through fire and ice. No bright banners waved, no familiar victory symbols painted across the hull, only silence, cold and heavy. From the ground they looked like floating mountains, still and watchful. The city's news feeds exploded with images, people across Earth staring into the heavens, expecting a grand broadcast from the fleet's commanders, expecting a story of heroism, of battles fought and won, of colonies saved. Instead, the first signal came through every device, every screen, and it was only 3 words. The voice was flat, tired, almost broken. It said we were lied to, nothing else. No explanation, no names. Then the message repeated, slower this time, as if the speaker wanted to carve the words into the minds of everyone listening. Fear spread faster than a signal. Some people cheered thinking it was a coded call for help. Others froze because they understood the tone was not a request, it was a warning. Minutes later the lights in New Chicago flickered once, twice, and then the entire city went dark. Elevators stopped between floors, trains halted in tunnels, street lights died. The only illumination came from the faint blue glow of the fleet above. Then without warning a single beam of pale light shot from the Orion to the center of the city. It did not explode. It did not burn. It simply touched a building and the building crumbled into a fine silver dust that drifted away on the night air. There was no sound, no fire, only the soft collapse of matter breaking apart. People screamed and ran though they did not know where to run. In the control rooms of Earth Security Command, alarms screamed as power grids failed one by one. Officers shouted coordinates, but none of their weapons would lock onto the ships above. It was as if the fleet had vanished from radar even while hanging in plain sight, high above, on the Orion's bridge. Admiral Reeve stood silent, his face pale under the dim lights, his officers tense at their stations. Behind his eyes was the weight of a truth too heavy to speak yet. The fleet had not returned as protectors, and not as invaders in the ordinary sense. They had come back to end something, and that ending would leave nothing untouched. Reeve had ordered no salutes, no greetings, no talks with the council. His only command was to hold position and target every major power center on the planet. In the council's private chambers, panic boiled beneath the polished calm of their public faces. They sent urgent demands to the fleet, promising safe return, offering full cooperation, but every channel remained silent, except for the same message looping over and over. We were lied to. In the streets below, the silence after the blackout was worse than a beam of destruction. It pressed against the ears, made every footstep sound too loud. Parents clutched their children, radios hissed with static, and the blue lights above never blinked. Hours earlier, in the quiet of the deep rim, the fleet had passed through the wreckage of colonies no one on Earth knew were gone. They had walked among cities reduced to skeletons of twisted metal, found air that tasted of ash and oceans turned to frozen glass, and on those worlds, they had found the signs, carved into stone and steel, signs that spoke of a bargain made in secret between the council and an alien empire so ancient no one dared speak its name aloud. The bargain was simple, protection in exchange for surrender. The colonies were not abandoned by accident. They had been given away, sacrificed to something that promised to never touch Earth itself. But the promise had been broken, and the fleet had seen what came after. Now they were here to keep it from reaching the home world. But keeping it out meant more than building defenses. It meant cutting away every place the alien influence had touched, even if that place was a human city, and even if billions had to die. Reeve closed his eyes as the second beam lit the night. Somewhere far below, a council member slammed his fist against a desk and shouted that the fleet had gone rogue, that they had lost their minds, but in truth the madness had begun long before they returned, in a deal signed in secret, in the greed that traded stars for safety, and now the price was due. On the streets, Jonah Vale, a retired fleet captain, stared up at the Orion and felt the old rhythm of war drums in his chest. He knew Reeve, knew the man's eyes. If Reeve was here doing this, then something beyond politics was at work. Jonah pulled his coat tight and moved into the shadowed alleys, determined to reach the underground comms hub before the next beam fell, because if the fleet was telling the truth, and if they really were lied to, then the real enemy was not in the sky, it was somewhere much closer, hidden in plain sight, and the night was far from over. Mia Cross sat alone in the lowest level of the Earth Security Center, the hum of dead servers echoing through the dim room. She had been called in after the blackout to monitor incoming signals, but so far all she had seen was static. Her workstation was one of the last still running, powered by a hidden generator deep under layers of concrete. The others upstairs had no idea she could still see what was passing through the scrambled channels. When the Orion's second beam fell, her screens flickered, and in between the static she caught something, a thin line of code embedded inside the fleet's looping message. It was not random. It pulsed like a heartbeat, faster, slower, faster again, almost like someone was trying to send words without speaking. She leaned closer, fingers flying over the manual controls, pulling apart the signal piece by piece. What she found made her breath catch. Hidden under the repeated "we were lied to" was a string of coordinates, not for any city on Earth, but for a secure council vault in Geneva, a vault known only to the highest members. She had worked at security for years, but she had never seen those numbers. Her pulse quickened. She copied them to a small personal drive, slipping it into her pocket as footsteps echoed in the hall outside. The door opened and two men in council uniforms stepped in, their faces expressionless. One asked why she was still online. She forced a smile and said she was shutting down. They nodded and left, but their eyes lingered too long on her hands. As soon as the door closed, she killed the overhead lights and switched to the emergency monitor. A second signal was bleeding through, this one not from the fleet but from somewhere inside their own security grid. The voice was shaky, young, male, saying if anyone was hearing this, the council lied about the colonies. They lied about why the fleet was sent away. They lied about what they found. He was cut off mid-sentence by the sound of metal doors slamming shut, and then silence. Mia's stomach turned cold. She knew this was the kind of transmission people disappeared for. She transferred it to the same drive, and just as she was about to disconnect, a new alert flashed. The fleet's third beam had struck, not a city this time, but the Council's own orbital data hub, wiping decades of secure files in seconds. The upper levels would be in chaos now, which meant this was her only chance to get out. She grabbed her coat, hid the drive inside the lining, and stepped into the emergency stairwell. Above her the building groaned as backup power failed. Red lights washing the walls in warning. Outside in the streets the air felt heavier, charged, like a storm was building, though the sky was clear except for the silent ships. She moved quickly through narrow back roads, past abandoned trams and clusters of people whispering in the dark. Every few blocks she saw security drones scanning the crowd, looking for someone, maybe her, maybe anyone carrying information the council didn't want leaking. In her mind the coordinates burned like fire. Whatever was in that vault in Geneva was important enough for the fleet to hide inside their own warning, and if Reeve had sent it, it meant it could change everything. She reached the edge of the district and found the mag rail was dead, so she ducked into the old subway tunnels, her footsteps echoing against the damp stone. Somewhere in the distance water dripped, and behind her she heard the faint metallic clink of boots on rail. She didn't look back. She kept moving, faster, weaving through the dark, until she reached a rusted service door, pushing it open into a forgotten maintenance room lit only by the glow of a single battery lamp. Inside, Jonah Vale was waiting, his eyes sharp, his hand resting on a small comms unit. He didn't seem surprised to see her. He simply said, "You have something." She didn't ask how he knew. She just nodded and handed him the drive. He plugged it in, scanned the files, and for the first time since the blackout began, she saw his face change, not to fear, but to something like grim understanding. He looked up and said, "The council's been building something, not for us, not even for war, but for them." and it's already here." Before she could ask what he meant, the ground shook as if the city itself had taken a breath. Then a deep rumble rolled through the tunnels, dust raining from the ceiling. Jonah grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the far exit. Seeing they had to move now, the vault in Geneva was more than just records. It was a door, and the fleet wasn't here to kill. Not exactly. They were here to make sure that door never opened, but someone on Earth was already trying to unlock it. The Council's chamber in Geneva was a fortress of glass and steel, standing like a black mirror against the cold night, its upper floors still glowing faintly despite the rolling blackouts across the city. Inside, the air was tense, voices low and sharp. The members sat in a circle under the heavy dome, their faces half hidden in shadow as holographic projections of the returning fleet shimmered between them, each image a silent accusation hanging in the air. One man, Counselor Brannick, slammed his palm on the table and demanded the others stop sending transmission requests to Admiral Reeve. He said every unanswered call made them look weaker. Another argued they had to reassert control before the public realized the truth, but their voices faltered when Chairwoman Elra spoke, her tone icy. She said there would be no truth shared. Not now, not ever. And then she brought up a lock file marked only with a red sigil none of the junior aides had seen before. The file opened and filled the dome with images, not of human worlds, but of black skies lit by strange shapes, colossal spires rising from dead planets, each spire pulsing with a dim, unnatural light. Brannick's voice softened to a whisper as he recognized them. Artifacts left by an ancient empire known in forbidden records as the Veith, beings older than the human race itself, long vanished from the stars, or so they had thought. Elra revealed the truth with no hesitation. 10 years ago, the Council had made contact with what remained of the Veith. The beings were not bodies but consciousness bound into the spires, minds that could cross light years without moving. They promised protection from rival species in exchange for sanctuaries, places where their spires could be planted and fed by the energy of living worlds. The colonies given to them had been the first sanctuaries, abandoned under the cover of war. The fleet had been sent not to defend those colonies, but to deliver the final shipments of resources and secure the Veith's expansion. The deal was supposed to keep Earth untouched, but the Veith had changed the terms. Now they wanted a sanctuary on the homeworld itself, and the vault beneath this very building was where the chosen spire was stored, locked away until the right time. Brannick's hands shook as he asked if the fleet's destruction of cities was meant to stop the spire's activation. Elra said flatly that the fleet had turned against them, and that if they reached the vault, they would destroy it along with the city. The chamber erupted in argument, some members insisting they negotiate with Reeve, others calling for the immediate use of Earth's orbital cannons to destroy the Orion. But even as they argued, a new alert lit up the central display, not from the fleet, but from inside the building. Security feeds showed Jonah, Vale and Mia Cross moving through an old service corridor below the main floor, carrying a drive now flagged as top threat by the internal AI. Elra's eyes narrowed. She ordered security to seal the lower levels, cut all escape routes, and retrieve the drive at any cost. Brannick hesitated, saying Jonah had once commanded a battle group for Earth and had friends in the fleet. If he was here it meant there was more to Reeve's warning than they understood, but Elra silenced him with a single look, her voice like glass breaking as she said there would be no more hesitation. The Veith would arrive within the hour to claim their sanctuary, and if the fleet thought they could stop it, they would find themselves buried under the ashes of Geneva. Far above, in the cold silence of orbit, Reeve stood at the Orion's main viewport watching the faint lights of the city below. His comms officer reported the vault was still sealed, but power readings indicated the spire's containment field was weakening. Reeve's jaw tightened. He gave the order to prepare the planetary lances, weapons designed to cut deep into the ground. Jonah's face flashed in his mind, an old ally who would understand that if the vault opened, there would be no Earth left to save. In the tunnels below, Jonah and Mia reached a narrow steel door with the Council's crest burned into it. Behind it lay the lift to the vault, but before they could open it, the lights flickered and the sound of heavy boots filled the hall. Council security teams flooding the corridor with rifles raised. Jonah raised his hand slowly, but his mind was already counting the seconds, because somewhere above their heads, a fleet weapon was charging, and if they didn't get to the vault first, the next beam from the Orion would turn Geneva and everyone in it into dust. The air above Geneva shimmered like heat rising from desert sand. Though the night was cold, a low vibration spread across the city, rattling glass, shaking dust from the rooftops, every head tilted upward as the Orion shifted position in the sky, its massive hull blotting out the stars. From its underbelly a wide bay opened, and millions of small silver objects poured out, descending in slow, steady streams. At first people thought they were weapons, missiles, or bombs, but the objects didn't fall fast. They drifted, turning lazily in the air like seeds blown from a great tree, each one a smooth sphere with faint lines glowing along its surface. They landed silently on buildings, streets, bridges, then sprouted thin metallic tendrils that wrapped around whatever they touched, metal, stone, glass, even human skin, and began pulling it apart piece by piece. It was not destruction like fire or explosions, it was disassembly, the quiet unmaking of the world. Skyscrapers lost their shape as walls peeled away like paper, bridges dissolved into clouds of dust, statues and monuments crumbled to powder without a sound. The council chamber shook as tendrils snaked through the upper windows, pulling steel beams out of the walls. Above the chaos, the fleet's smaller ships moved like dark vultures, scanning, marking, guiding the swarm of silver spheres. To the fleet this was cleansing, a precise erasure of anything touched by alien influence, but to the people below it was nothing less than the death of their home. In the tunnels, Jonah heard the low groan of collapsing structures above, the ceiling dust falling thicker. He grabbed Mia's wrist and pulled her toward the vault door, knowing the swarm would eventually reach even this deep. Behind them the council security team closed in, their weapons shaking as the ground trembled. The leader barked at Jonah to drop the drive. Jonah instead reached into his coat and pulled a small device from his pocket, pressing it to the steel wall beside the vault door. It began to hum and glow, a cutting charge designed to slice through reinforced alloy. The security leader shouted again, but then a section of the ceiling gave way, a massive tendril smashing through, scattering debris. One of the guards was pulled upward screaming as the metallic vines wrapped around him, pulling him toward the surface. Jonah didn't waste a distraction. He shoved Mia through the opening as the charge finished its cut. The door slid open to reveal a lift shaft dropping into darkness. They stepped inside and the lift began to descend. Above, the tendrils filled the hall, wrapping the walls and pulling them apart like they were nothing. In the sky, Reeve watched the city's map, glowing markers showing where the cleansing was complete, where alien traces had been found in the very materials of Earth's buildings, traces invisible to the human eye but glowing bright in the fleet scans. He knew the people below didn't understand. They only saw their world falling apart, and maybe that was all they needed to see, because the truth that Avitha's presence was seated not in the cities but in the people themselves was too heavy to speak. On the council's upper floors, Elra stood in the open air as the chamber's roof was torn away, a cold wind whipping her hair. She watched the silver swarm flow over the skyline, reshaping everything into dust and smooth nothingness, and for a moment she thought she saw a figure standing on the edge of the nearest ship. Tall and still, watching her through the chaos, but when she blinked it was gone. Below ground the lift shuddered to a stop, and Jonah and Mia stepped out into a cavern lit by a single pale light. In the center stood the spire, taller than a building, blacker than night, its surface shifting like liquid though it was solid. It pulsed with a heartbeat that was not mechanical, not alive in any way humans understood, and as they stepped closer, the air grew heavy, their thoughts slowed, and a voice not their own whispered inside their heads, saying the door is open, the hour has come, and the stars will be ours again. The moment Jonah heard that voice inside his head he staggered back, gripping the wall as if the ground itself had tilted. Mia clutched her temples, gasping as images flashed through her mind, burning skies over alien cities, black oceans swallowing continents, stars winking out one by one as the spires rose over every world they touched. The voice was calm, patient, and far too certain of its victory. Jonah shook his head and forced his mind to focus. He had been in battles before. He had seen men freeze in the middle of a firefight because the enemy got into their heads. But this was different. This was not fear. It was seduction, a slow pull toward surrender. He pulled Mia away from the spire's glow and into the shadow of the cavern wall, whispering to stay behind him. Above them the faint sound of the silver swarm tearing the city apart echoed down the shaft, each crash a reminder they had only minutes. Jonah pulled a small signal beacon from his belt, a device so old most people had forgotten the fleet even used them. He flicked it on, and a sharp blue light blinked in his hand. Somewhere far above in the Orion's comms bay, a junior officer caught the ping on his console. The signature was unmistakable. It belonged to Captain Jonah Vale, long presumed retired and off-world. The officer's eyes widened and he routed the signal to Admiral Reeve without hesitation. Reeve's voice was hard but quiet when he asked Jonah if he'd reached the vault. Jonah said he had, but the spire was already waking. Reeve's silence lasted too long. Then he said there was no time for extraction. The lance would fire in 3 minutes. Jonah's mind raced. 3 minutes was barely enough to get clear of the cavern, and even if they did, the city above would be erased along with everyone still trapped in it. Mia heard the words too and stepped forward, saying there had to be another way. Reeve's voice dropped lower, almost breaking. He said the only other way was to contain the spire manually, which meant getting close enough to overload its core from inside. Jonah looked at the black tower and knew it was a death sentence. Still, the thought of leaving it to wake was worse. He asked Reeve what would happen if they failed, and Reeve said then the spire would not only survive the lance, it would use the weapon's energy to spread faster, reaching every major city on Earth within hours. Jonah turned to Mia, expecting her to demand they run, but she only nodded once, her eyes steady. She said if the council made this thing, then she was not going to run from it. Jonah smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes before stepping into hell. He asked Reeve to hold the lance until his signal. Reeve said he had 5 minutes, no more, and then the line went dead. Jonah pulled a second device from his pack, a thin cylinder wrapped in wires, the containment spike designed to pierce the spire's surface and send a surge through its core, overloading the alien consciousness inside. They moved toward the black tower, every step heavier, the whispering in their heads growing louder, offering them visions of victory, peace, endless knowledge if they would just stop, drop the weapon, and let the door open. The air around the spire shimmered, the walls of the cavern bending like heat waves. Mia stumbled but Jonah caught her, shoving the spike into her hands and telling her that if he went down, she had to finish it. Above ground the Orion shifted again, its massive lances glowing white-hot, the swarm of silver spheres pulling back into the sky as if making way for the kill shot. In the council's broken chamber Elra screamed at the sight, ordering every cannon on Earth to fire on the fleet, but their weapons were blind, every targeting system still jammed by the fleet's countermeasures. Brannick stood silently in the corner, his eyes on the sky, knowing that whatever happened next would decide not just the city's fate, but the fate of the entire human race. Below, Jonah and Mia reached the base of the spire, its surface rippling under their touch like oil on water, the whispers rising into a deafening chorus. Jonah lifted the spike, feeling his muscles tremble not from fear but from the sheer weight of the things will pressing down on him, and as he prepared to strike, the spire moved. The moment the resistance signal echoed through the dark void, it was as if the stars themselves leaned closer to listen, the faint pulse of coded light racing across the silent black between worlds while far below on Earth battered cities smoldered under the bruised colors of a dying sky and people whispered that hope had just been reborn. But Captain Illiran knew better. Because the signal was not just a call for unity, it was a warning that something inside their own fleet had already turned against them. Her warship Orion's edge cutting through the upper atmosphere as fragments of burned satellites drifted past like the bones of old battles, the comms alive with voices that didn't sound like soldiers anymore but frightened human beings, whispering of ghost ships appearing between jumps and disappearing without trace, and she remembered the words of Admiral Kale. Before the first assault, trust only the stars you can see, which now seemed less like wisdom and more like a confession that they had been lied to from the very beginning. For even as their fighters regrouped and the hidden outposts came online ready to launch one desperate strike, sensors began detecting faint transponder codes that matched ships from Earth's own fleet, except those ships had been declared destroyed weeks ago, their crews lost in deep space, and yet here they were, moving through the darkness without broadcasting voice, without answering calls, like silent hunters, and every time Orion's edge tried to change course to intercept, the ghost ships altered direction in perfect unison as though guided by something far more precise than human instinct, forcing Illiran to face the truth that the resistance signal had awakened not only allies but enemies buried within their own ranks, and in the war room the holographic star map flickered under the weight of so many conflicting trajectories until it resembled a shattered mirror, every shard of battle they could not win if the enemy was already inside their gates. So she ordered all encryption keys changed, all fleet IDs purged. But the order came too late, because somewhere deep in the ship's underdeck where shadows stretched long under the dim emergency lights, A figure in an unmarked flight suit was already feeding new coordinates into the NAV core, eyes reflecting the cold glow of alien glyphs that no humans should have been able to read, and as the engines thrummed to life beneath their feet, Illyria realized with a hollow ache in her chest that they were no longer moving toward the resistance rendezvous. They were being pulled, quietly and without consent, toward a place no one in the fleet had ever dared to chart, a sector the star maps marked only with a single word in red: forbidden, and she didn't know if it was the crew's fear or the ship's own frame that trembled first when the stars outside began to bend, as if reality itself was being peeled back to let something through. The Orion's edge slid into the rift like a stone disappearing beneath black water, and the stars outside stretched into impossible streaks of light before shattering into a darkness so deep it felt alive, the ship's hull groaning under the pressure of a place that should not exist, while every sensor screamed in static and the crew clung to their stations as if the cold would reach through the metal and take them, and Captain Illyria, her voice low but steady, ordered the NAV core to reverse jump. Only to watch the controls lock with alien code that pulsed like veins through the holographic display, the symbols shifting and breathing as though mocking human language. Then the ghost ships appeared, 12 of them, drifting in a perfect circle around Orion's edge like vultures around a wounded animal, their hulls scarred but gleaming with a faint blue light that seemed to seep into the surrounding dark. And in that moment she understood they weren't just stolen vessels, they were transformed, rebuilt by something on the other side of the war. And from the comms came a voice that wasn't one voice at all but thousands speaking in perfect unison, saying, "We opened the door because you kept knocking." And as the words sank in, the rift rippled and a colossal shadow began to form, dwarfing every ship in the circle, its outline so massive it eclipsed the starlight itself until there was nothing left but the slow pulse of its heartbeat in the void, each beat making the deck beneath her boots vibrate like a living drum. And she thought of the resistance signal, of the sacrifices, of the worlds they had lost, realizing now that the war they had been fighting was never the true war, it had only been the prologue to this moment. And the shadow unfurled like wings carved from the night, revealing eyes that burned like collapsing suns, each one locking on her ship as if she had been the one it had been waiting for all along. And then the voice returned, softer now, almost intimate, promising, "Cross fully, and you will see why you were chosen." And the ghost ships ignited their drives in perfect unison, dragging Orion's edge deeper into the dark. And though every instinct told her to fight, Illyria found herself unable to move, her crew frozen as if time itself had bowed to this entity. And she knew, with a cold clarity sharper than fear, that they had already crossed a line no human could return from, and that whatever lay ahead was not just the end of the mission, it was the end of the universe they knew, a place where the rules of light and gravity were written by something older than creation itself. And as the darkness closed like a fist, the last star they could see blinked out, leaving only the promise of what waited beyond.